All right, I've got lots for us to chat about today because this is a topic that I think is going to resonate with so many of us because this is huge. This is one that I really get stuck with. And so we'll see if you do too. And I apologize for the time delay. I was actually supposed to go live about an hour and a half ago. I use Restream so that I can stream. That's the software that I stream from. And apparently they had some kind of technical glitch where nobody could go live. And so we just had to kind of sit and wait for that to happen. And when things like this happen, it's a good learning chance for me to kind of test myself and say, how much do I actually put into practice like what I preach? Do you practice what you preach? Because if this happened to somebody else or this happened to a client, what would I say to them? Because I was ready to go. I had all my notes. I made sure everybody was out of the house. I was like, all right, I'm ready to go live and to pour into you. And then all of a sudden, it's not connecting. It's not connecting. I shut down my computer. It's not connecting. So finally, I reach out to technical support. I get a message back. It says, yep, this is across the board. It's not going live for anybody. How do you respond? Right? Because I think a lot of times isn't it so much easier to tell people what to do than to do it yourself? Like, how much easier is it for us to be like, oh, yeah, I know what to do. I can tell you what to do. Doesn't mean that I'm going to do it myself. And so I said, okay, Tara, how are you going to respond to this? Because again, if this was a client, what would I say? I'd say, well, let's reframe this. What is the good that's going to come out of this? Um, and instead, I was like, that's why I hate technology and why isn't this working out? Right. So then I had to stop. This is a big part of the work that we do, right? Like, are you even aware? Do we even stop and do we think? So I had to stop and think. And I had to say, okay, what's the good that came out of this? And the one thing that I thought of is that maybe somebody who wasn't planning on joining us live, somebody who doesn't even know who I am, somebody who wasn't following any of these events, that you're going to be, scrolling through your LinkedIn or your Facebook or whatever and pop in and connect. And that we are meant to be connected and you are meant to hear this conversation and that this is something that's going to bless you and serve you. And you wouldn't have seen it if I had been live at the time that I was supposed to be live. So let's see if that's what happens. That is how I'm going to reframe that situation. So we're going to talk today about, you've done the work and you're still stuck. And I think this is really common with high achieving women. And I don't really like that term because I think everybody is high achieving. But this idea of people who are really driven, who are going after goals or going after dreams, and they feel like, I've taken the courses, I've read the book, I still feel stuck. What is going on? Why is that happening? And so it's kind of like this cycle, right? We go to a conference, we read a book, we listen to a podcast, we get some mentorship, and we do something and we start to get some momentum. And we talked last week about how momentum is very temporary. We get some momentum, we make some changes, right? How many of you feel like, oh, I just need to change? We make some changes, we see some slight results, but then 2, 3, 4 months we're kind of back in the same spot and we're looking for the next change to make things different, right? And so we get into this, what I call a cycle of temporary change. And here's how the cycle goes: we get frustrated, we do the work, we feel a short burst of progress, then life gets busy, we get busy, we slide back into our habits, into our routines and who we are, and then we kind of wait to get motivated again. And that went into that conversation that we had last week about being motivated. And here's why I think this happens. At least this is what I have experienced for myself over 28 years of this cycle. It's because most of the time we are trying to change, and change means that we're trying to become somebody else. And it doesn't stick because it's not rooted into how we're designed, how we're wired in our DNA. It's modeled after somebody else and what worked for them. And I used to have this all the time. I remember my first probably 10, 15 years in business. I wanted to be successful. I would see successful people and I would think, I just need to learn what they're doing." Have you ever thought that? Hey, Tracy, I just need to learn what they're doing. If they would just tell me what they were doing, then I could do what they were doing. And I would go to conferences and I would go to seminars and I would go to workshops and I would invest time and I would invest money and I would think, I just need to learn what other successful people are doing so I can do what they do. And sometimes I would hear what they were doing. They had a strategy, they had a plan, they were doing something, and I would go home and I would try to model that. I would try to implement that. Have you ever done that? And then I would be frustrated why I didn't get the results that they were getting. I remember one specific, this was probably, oh my gosh, like 25 years ago. And there was this woman, she had joined my company and she became very, very successful. And we ended up on a phone call. And I said to her, "What did you do?" Like, and she said, "Well, it was the last week of the year, and I had this big goal, and this is what I did. I went out and I did this." And she said, "And that's how I pulled it all together." And I thought, well, I can do that. And I went out and I did that. Now, let me preface that I hated it. I didn't like what she was, I didn't like, that wasn't my style. That wasn't me. It wasn't that I didn't like her, but like what her strengths were not my strengths. And so I went out and I did what she did and totally failed, totally bombed, fell on my face, didn't get any results, and then felt very frustrated. And it wasn't until years and years later of a lot of this work that we do that I realized that the reason it didn't work for me was because I was doing what worked for her in her strengths, not in my strengths, that was never going to work for me because that wasn't me. And so I think sometimes we tell ourselves, well, I'm lazy or I'm not focused or I'm whatever it is because we're trying to build a life that doesn't really match who we are. It matches somebody else's strengths. They've figured out their strengths and now we're just trying to be them. So let's talk about change. Okay. Let's talk about what the word change means. So change, if you use it as a verb to change, like if you're actually doing something, you're a verb. It's from the 1200s and it meant to alter, make different. And the early 1300s, I think this is really interesting. Change meant to substitute one for another, to make something other than what it was. Hmm. It goes on to go to become different or altered. All right. But I think this is very interesting, this idea that it's to make something other than it was. And so when we say, I want to change, what we're saying is, I want to make myself something other than I was. And I will just tell you that from a very biblical standpoint, that is not something that we should desire because you are made in the image of God in the way that He wanted you to be. Why are we trying to change that and become somebody that we're not? And so this becomes a problem. Hey, Carrie, this becomes a problem. Most of us are trying to change by becoming different from who we are instead of deepening into who we are, instead of deepening into the stuff that's really great about ourselves. And so we focus on this making different. And then what happens is we can do that temporarily, but then we revert back to our old self after this like brief bout of change, right? Because we really can't change who we are. We can't change our DNA, our wiring, like how we are. Now we can change our habits, we can change some of our thoughts, but when we're really, really trying to like get off the path of who we are, that's not great. Like that's not good, right? Because really what we want to do is we want to reclaim our power, which isn't about changing ourselves. It's about knowing ourselves. It's about knowing our strengths. It's about knowing our weaknesses. And it's about knowing what drives us and then stepping into that power so that we can use it for our best lives. Okay. So let me give you an example. I'm not a morning person. I, how many of you guys can relate to this? I have for years thought I needed to be a morning person to be successful. There are people who literally have built their entire careers talking about creating a morning routine, and you need a solid morning routine and you need to get up early, and early bird gets the worm, right? Well, let me tell you, I don't even want to eat a worm, so I don't know why I'm trying to do that, but early bird gets the worm. We're conditioned in our culture, and this is because of how our culture is set up. Schools start at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. Jobs start 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. They're structured on a 24-hour workday. Now there's a ton of research even that's coming out now that the regular corporate environment is actually structured on a man's cycle, which is a 24-hour cycle, versus a woman's cycle, which is a 28-day cycle, right? So our whole society is set up in a way that isn't even really designed to support women, but then it's even worse because it's this morning culture, morning culture, morning culture. And so I tried to be a morning person. And I used to really beat myself up that this was what was wrong with me. Have you ever done this? Like we judge ourselves. This is what is wrong with me. This is what is wrong with me, that I'm not a morning person. I should be a morning person. If I was a morning person, I would be more successful, all of this. And I remember years ago, I was sitting at a conference and there was a woman, and there were two women who really shaped this. So one was a woman who had broken a bunch of records in my company. And very successful. And she talked about that she really didn't start her day until 11 because that was how she was wired. And she was talking about, because I've hit these records and because I've been so successful and I've been able to build this business, I have the luxury of being able to sleep until 11 now because this is what my natural wiring is, right? Yeah, Tracy, I'm an evening person too. I'm a night owl. And so I was like, huh, here's this woman who's super successful who bought all these records, and she is not a morning person. And then I went to another conference, another workshop. And this is where I think I will say, and I had somebody recently ask me, like, how do you know everything that you know in about business and in your business and everything? And I was like, 28 years of learning. But one thing I did really well is I went to everything. I went to every conference. I went to every workshop. I went to everything that I could go to that successful people were at so I could learn from them. And so I had this mentor who's been a big mentor of me throughout my career. And she talked about the fact that the way her day is structured is that she's a slow morning person. She gets up in the morning, she drinks her coffee, she does her reading, she really eases into the day. And then she kind of starts her day around 11 or 12 o'clock. Now, what she was saying is, she's like, I'm often working 7 to 9 p.m. at night when everybody else is home, relaxing, having dinner, and they're not working. She's like, so it's not that I don't work. It's not like, oh, I'm easing into my day and then I work a few hours in the afternoon and then I don't work. She goes, I work a full time schedule. It's just that I work one that works for me. I work at times where I'm, most productive. And I thought, I love that because, guys, I am not a morning person. I do want to ease into my day. And so when people talk about creating that morning routine and they talk about, having their coffee and doing their meditation and reading, they're usually talking about doing that at 5, 6 in the morning before the day starts, right? But if that is not how you are wired, then when we try to mimic somebody else's success, that's going to be a problem. Yeah. So what are your times that are best? Now, here's the trick, right? This doesn't mean that we don't work. Guys, I get creative streaks often at like 11 o'clock at night. There have been many, many, many times over my career where I was creating at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. Like when I was writing my book, when I was blogging. I mean, a lot of that stuff would be early, early in the morning. Like, and then I would go to sleep until 9, 10 o'clock in the morning because that's where I would get my burst. And I always worked against this. I always thought this was something wrong with me. And how many of us do this? We beat ourselves up because we think there's something wrong with me. Well, let me tell you, Winston Churchill, he woke up around 7:30 in the morning, but do you know that he actually remained in bed? He would work, he would read the newspapers until about 11 o'clock. He did not get out of bed until 11 o'clock. And then he would take a stroll. He would take a walk around 11 o'clock. And then he would have a multi course lunch. And then he would take an afternoon nap before he started work again. Winston friggin' Churchill, right? He figured out a schedule that worked with his body and his rhythm. Now, do you guys know Reddit, the website Reddit? So the co-founder is this guy, Alexis Odahan. I'm not even sure if that's how you say his name. And he talks about how he uses his cat as his alarm clock. He said he's usually up pretty late. He doesn't usually go to bed before 2 a.m. And so he usually wakes up around 10 a.m. Now, guys, that's my kind of schedule. Like, I'm a good if I went to bed around 1 in the morning and got up around 9. He's the founder, one of the co-founders of Reddit. So these are highly successful people. They've also found there's some like artists who, like Da Vinci was one of these guys where he didn't work, he didn't sleep a regular sleep schedule. He took 20-minute breaks like every few hours and never actually slept like through a night. He would do these 20-minute breaks throughout the day. So there's always been these creatives and these geniuses that have kind of just tweaked what works for them. And here's what I think is key. It's like it's not right or it's not wrong. It's what works for you. Now, here's what's really interesting. Science is now saying, hey, there's some validity in this. We have chronotypes, which is kind of like our internal clock, and it's mainly biological. It's really has to do with a lot of like your parents and how they were wired and the genes that you connected or inherited from them. And so they said when you're constantly trying to become somebody you're not, if you're a night owl and you're trying to become a morning person, there's this mismatch between your internal clock and this real world time. And when you are mismatched, they have found that this actually is linked to things like heart disease, obesity, depression. There's a woman, her name is Katharina Wolf. She studies this idea of chronotype, chronobiology, and sleep. And she says, quote, if people are left to their naturally preferred time, they feel much better. They say that they are much more productive and their mental capacity they have is much broader. So it's actually like your body knows what it wants to do, right? So here's what happens. And this is true in everything. And I'm just using sleep as an example. When we try to change who we are, when we try to become something so different that is so misaligned from who we are, it will always be temporary. Because real change has to do more with returning to who we are and then building from that. Okay? So, what actually works? Well, this is really the heart of what I do and the work that I do and what we do in Hey Girl You Can and in the Reclaim Your Power Day, because it's not about becoming somebody you're not. It's about knowing yourself so well that you can become the best version of you. So, it's not about doing more work, it's about doing the right work and doing it really deeply, right? And so we need to not listen to what everybody else is doing and say, I need to do what they're doing, but instead get to know ourselves and then harness that real power. Okay. Um, okay. I want to just make sure I have any other notes that I want because there's a few things I want to make sure that we go over before we go. Okay. So, one of the things that we do in the Reclaim My Power Day, right, is that we want to get rid of this cycle of like, I have to change, I have to be different than I am. All right. So, when we go through the day, the reclaim is all the different sections that we do throughout the day. So, a big part of what we're doing is getting to know us, getting to know your drivers, getting to know like, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And a lot of people think they know and they don't. So when we work together, like you will know because a lot of people think I'm an extrovert and I'm an introvert. And then we do this work and they go, oh my gosh, I did not realize this makes so much more sense now why I am the way that I am. But even things like what drives you, who drives you, where do you get your energy? I mean, this is work that I do with the I was doing with the Power of Pause event. Like we were talking about like what gives you energy and what drains your energy. Sometimes we're not even really aware of that. And so if we can figure that out, if we can work together and figure out what gives you energy, you can do more of that. And then we can move away from the things that drain us, right? And we really get into like, what do you want? And we've been talking about this as I've been going live. There's a very big difference between what we actually want versus what we think we want, because this is what society, parents, culture, spouses, jobs have told us we should want. And again, this gets into the change. We're trying to change as somebody that we're not so that we can have something that we think we're supposed to want. And this is all misaligned. This is all misaligned. And this is why we get so frustrated. This is why we get anxiety. This is why we get overwhelmed. This is why we get depressed because there's such a misalignment here, right? So when we can really get clear on how we are wired, why we think the way we think, what has caused us to become those people? Like what's happened in your life that has caused you to become the person that you've become? I had a coaching call this morning with a girl and we were talking about um relationships, and we were saying that she had said to a family member, they were talking about her relationships, and the family member said to her, well, relationships are hard. And she said, so I've always believed relationships were hard. Well, that family member, the relationships had been hard. She was divorced. She had had things that had happened. And so they were. That was her belief. That was true for her. But I said, but is that true for you? And do you want that to be true for you? Do you believe that? One of the most powerful things that we can do is every time you have a thought or somebody says, well, you shouldn't be like this, or relationships are hard, or money doesn't grow on trees, or you have to work harder to be successful, or whatever it is that we're told. Good meaning people, well meaning people, people who love us, right? I've probably done this to my daughter. I have my own beliefs that I am sure, not probably, I am sure have said to her at one point or another that if she really stepped back, she might go, huh, if that's true. That might be true for my mom, but is that true for me? Very different. So just being able to stop and say, is this true for me? Do I believe this? Why do I believe this? What evidence do I have for this? That is powerful because then you can step back and actually choose what you want to believe, right? And then you can figure out, well, what do I want? Why do I want it? And how am I wired best to get it? See, I believe you can have anything that you want, but you have to know how you're best wired to get it. And when you have that, that is where you feel powerful and confident. That is where your confidence comes from. I did a post recently. If you follow me on social media, and if you don't, I would love for you to follow. Come comment, tag, say hi. Would love your feedback. So it's all Tara's voice everywhere. Um, but I did a thing about confidence and what the word means. And do you know that the word confidence actually just means to trust? You have confidence in something, you're trusting it. And so when we have self confidence, it's that we trust ourselves. We trust ourselves that we'll be able to figure it out. We trust ourselves that we'll be able to bounce back. We trust ourselves that even if I fall, I can pick myself back up. That's what self confidence is. The word confidence is just trust, right? You have confidence that, when you cross a bridge, the bridge isn't going to fall. I don't have a lot of confidence in that. That's why I'm afraid of bridges. But that's what it is. It's just you have confidence in something, you have trust in something. And so self confidence truly is just you trust yourself. And I do think as women, this is why women have sometimes less confidence than men. One of the conversations I had with Stephanie Blake, she's the founder of Simple Business Suite. She's where I use all my software to run my business, and she was on my podcast. And the question that came up, it was irrelevant questions, and the question that had came up was, how would you be different if you were born in the opposite gender? And that was one of the things that we talked about. Is that she's like, I probably would have had a lot more confidence. That boys and men just seem to have more confidence than women. And why is that? Because as women, we're often told not to trust ourselves. Like our guts will say something that's really like, ooh. And we're told, like, well, no, you're just being really, that's really feely. There's no evidence for that. How is that seem? It doesn't seem very logical. It's just something that you feel, it's intangible. But we're wise. There's a powerful feminine energy that is wise, that is intuition. And so when we trust ourselves and we trust that, even if it doesn't make sense to other people, that's that self-confidence that I trust myself. I'm confident. And so we do a lot in Hey Girl You Can about building your confidence using, actually, I'm going to be talking today at a summit all about how to use goals to build your confidence. Goal setting is a great way to hack your confidence. I talk about this quite a bit. Um, but if any of this resonates to you, if you're like, you know what, this is really the work that I need to do, I am ready for changes. I do not want to continue going on this path where I feel like I'm disconnected, then get on the wait list for the Reclaim Your Power Day. It needs to open. It was actually supposed to open this week. I got very busy, but one person on the wait list is going to win a free coaching session from me, which I do not sell coaching sessions. So it's the only way you can get one because I do not do private coaching at this point. And so that is how you can get one. But get on the wait list. Um, and if you go to my website, which is Tara G Online, actually, here, I'll put that up here. There is a really great, let's see if I can find it. Hold on. Yeah, here it is. I'm going to put it up here. If you go to my website here, it's just, and I want it to be able to show up. Hold on. I don't know how to do this. Let's see. Let's see if we can get a caption here. I'll put it on here. I'm not super great with the tech stuff. Here's my website. If you go here, it should go across the bottom. On the top right, when you click on it, there is a resiliency, 5-day resiliency challenge. I will pop into your email for 5 days and give you 5 separate tools to make you mentally stronger so that you do really become unstoppable, that you really do become the most bounce back, resilient person that you know, so that you have your confidence, that you start to trust yourself. So if you want that, it's totally free. You can go to my website to grab it. But I would love your thoughts. So tell me in the comments. And if you're watching the replay or watching this on YouTube, tell me your thoughts on, are you confident, and where have you stepped into maybe being somebody that you weren't supposed to be, trying to change instead of just stepping into who you really are. And then if you love this, come work with me during the Reclaim Your Power Day, and I will see you guys next week. Bye, everybody.